Today, we are going to play Who's This Guy about one Guerschon Yabusele. Because in the early stages of the Olympics, as he looked, I dare say, fucking awesome, he was doing it against, the Olympic pool of competition, as we've discussed on this show, is not apples to oranges. You've got 40-year-old Rudy Hernandez playing certain minutes. You've got 18-year-old phenoms trying to, stake their claim. And certain countries don't have this certain firepower. Others, I didn't know, as I was impressed by Yabusele, I didn't know. I was curious, as I do. When I have a thought, I'm like, I like that guy. I text a couple people and I say, hey, how much better is this guy than this person? That's typically how it goes. And the question I was presenting to people in the beginning, the group stage, was Grant Williams. Similar size, similar big bottom, similar how good is the shot? What will that mean for this player's overall effectiveness on the court and therefore earning potential? And Grant, I thought, was an interesting case study, particularly because he was also drafted by Boston. He was not valued by Boston as much as Dallas. And then Dallas also did not value him that much and sent him immediately away at that trade deadline. So, and he also made Grant's roughly above the mid-level exception, 12.8. He's at 13-ish over 3 years. That has become such an inflection point on the NBA market of, are you worth the mid-level or are you not? So he was the benchmark. And I will say, in the beginning, a lot of people were like, Grant Williams is way better than that guy. And then by the gold medal game, it was like, a lot of people, again, NBA talent evaluators were saying, some were saying that they would take him over Grant Williams right now, which is pretty fascinating when you consider the fact that he signed for just $2.1 million vet minimum with Philly, which when I asked Sixers folks about it, I was on a lovely hike with the dog when the news broke. And the word was that, well, if you could just get him on the vet minimum, it's kind of too good of a deal to pass up on, which I agree. If you're comparing, if you think he's as good as Grant Williams, let alone better, if you think he's in the conversation, that's a mid-level amount of discount. Interestingly, I think part of, and I know I've been rambling here to set this all up, but we've got just a touch of background reporting here. I think from around the league, the fact that he had a $2.5 million buyout from Real Madrid was something that was basically a non-starter for a lot of teams, because that buyout is more than the $2.1 million salary he's going to be making. And this season, NBA teams are only eligible to pay $850,000 of international buyout, which, if you want to get August podcast and loose lips on just two guys talking, there's been all kinds of rumors over the years about how teams just bridge that gap behind the scenes, a fancy dinner here, a private jet there. I am not under any circumstances suggesting that is what's happening here. However, I can report that because, look, on its face, Guerschon Yabusele would have to pay $1.6 million of this $2.1 million salary from Philly to get out of Real Madrid. So he'd basically be playing for Philly for $500,000 this year and taking a massive discount to do so. I have been told that Guerschon's camp and Real Madrid are working together to figure out an equitable solution to make all that happen. So I don't think there's anything nefarious going down. I don't think there's any reason to be hurting or feeling sorry for Guerschon Yabusele's pocketbook here. But I also think it's just an awesome signing for Philly. I think it's a great signing for him as well, because if you're looking at a chance to get back in the league, what better than a place that is contending for the title, ostensibly, and clearly has one hole on its roster at the 4, where maybe he's taken his dunking on LeBron abilities and his improved three-point stroke. Is there a world where he's in the closing lineup for Philly in certain games if everything in the Olympics translates? I don't think that's so crazy. So who is this guy, Dan?
Well, I don't think it is either, because you mentioned the issues at the 4 in Philly. Like, we've been talking about whether Paul George would play power forward since early in his Indiana career, and he doesn't really seem to like that idea. So you need somebody to sort of eat up the matchups there. And it's the likeliest outcome is that it's going to be Caleb Martin, because they, were able to sort of snare him in from the Heat. He's been he's smaller 4 there, but Yabusele is like legit 6'8". What is he like? On a nice, nice kind
240.
day, maybe 240, 250. I don't know,
240.
but is the shape and size of sort of a traditional 4. And I went back and look, you're absolutely right. The swing skills.
He's listed at 271 this last season.
Which, I mean, I don't know. It's, I think the goal would be for that not to be true, for him to be in the closing lineup and maybe starting eventually at some point.
I'm curious what he was listed on France's roster for the Olympics. Let's see.
It's a good question. But the swing skills for him are, and it's similar to the Grant Williams comp. It's how, mobile are you defensively? How versatile can you be on the defensive end? Not just using your size and bulk to anchor in the post, but also to guard switches on the perimeter, which is something he looked pretty damn good at for France in the Olympics. And then the 3-point shot. So over the course of 4+ seasons, so going back to 2020, all competitions in Europe. So when he was with Asvel in France's Pro A League, with Real Madrid, and then the EuroLeague competitions, together, a little over 200 games, a little over 600 or almost 700 3-point attempts from the shorter line. He shot 42%. So 700 attempts is pretty, reasonable sample, but from a shorter line. So if that translates to the NBA line, you're looking at a guy who on like a per 36 basis, it was something like 16 points, 6 boards, a little under 2 assists a game, and shot 40% from 3. The comps for guys of this size, roughly, on that list.
Which, by the way, France's official roster did not have waitlisted, maybe out of courtesy. I don't know.
Perhaps it would be ungentlemanly to do so.
Yeah.
So there's some past Sixers friends on there. George Niang.
Oh.
Mike Scott. Going back in the days, Rodney Rogers. And then there are some where I thought of, just because we like to try to make some jokes here, Saucy Nuggets, Paul Millsap.
Love it.
Where it's the older years, Paul Millsap in his mid-30s.
He was great in Denver.
Maybe more value on the defensive end of his career at that point. But I think the other thing would be ball movement, right? Can you be somebody who can connect the floor? And that's not something we have seen a ton of from Yabusele. It kind of depends. But also, they were not playing with a ton of guard help for France, and he took on a much larger role in that offense. So if he can be a complementary ball mover, that would go a long way. Thick Warriors Otto Porter.
He turned that into a nice payday and never played a ball again.
That's right. But a guy who can help on the glass, can be that sort of knockdown shooter from the corners or elsewhere on the floor, guard multiple positions, and just sort of like hold down a spot. Late model Kevin Amor. Could he be a sort of Heat Kevin Love? Maybe. I don't know. The 3-point volume probably not there, but possibly. And then the other one, it's mostly a butt joke, Dump Truck Robinson. So Truck Robinson, there you go. 80s guy, but mostly it's about the dumper there. I think there's a real chance there's a real chance that Yabusele just he can't translate fully back to NBA.
It's perfectly possible. The scale is there. Closing 4, can't get off the bench, and both are very plausible.
Yeah, but I think you're absolutely right to point to the gap in utility, where it's like, and the gap in price point. Grant Williams at the mid-level it was not as valuable as Grant Williams for significantly less than that in Boston, right? But in Boston, at a much lower price point, he was a main cog in playoff teams for multiple years of that run. The possibility of getting that kind of value this late in the postseason, or in the offseason rather, and with somebody who actually does have some real experience and is coming off of some of the best ball they've ever played, it's certainly a swing worth taking. And especially given that the discomfort in like are we going to plug those minutes with Caleb Martin and like KJ Martin, and who's going to be the 4 for this? Like, there's a real hole to fill there. And Yabusele seems like somebody who could fill a hole.
He could fill a hole. I know online there was some fanfare about calling him Baguette Ben Wallace, which is good.
But
there's an obvious better one.
Okay, well, that one was in it. So I was trying to do gameplay based ones. Baguette Ben Wallace was aesthetic. Well, I'm saying
if you're gonna use Ben Wallace, Ben Ye Wallace, come on, people. It's affiliated with New Orleans, but it's a French dish. Ben Ye Wallace was right there for the taking. Baguette Ben Wallace, he's not even skinnier. Ben Wallace is the baguette Guerschon Yabusele. But anyway, I think
Ben Wallace is the baguette Guerschon Yabusele. Ben Wallace, please don't come beat us up.
I just had a lovely 2-hour podcast with Rasheed Wallace back in Vegas, so we're on good terms. I hope that maybe Rasheed can be a conduit between me and Ben. But yeah, I mean, like 6'8", like you said. I mean, the top scale, I think, of like playmaker guys who could kind of shoot, because I think that was a big part of what made France's success turn in Olympic play, was the fact that the ball was put in Guerschon's hands with Isaiah Cordinier because of the guard play being not so magnifique as we have discussed here. So,
sorry, that surprised me. That caught me by legitimate surprise.
Thank you. So, I mean, like Julius Randle is like the fever dream best case scenario, I would say. I think the likelihood, to your point, I mean, he's going to be playing up at forward in theory. Like, this is not your father's NBA where your power forward 6'10" anymore. You know, this is not Dan Devine's NBA. So, I mean, he's got the body of beef stew. I think the tangible role, can he play some small ball 5, play 4, depending on the lineup of like contending type teams the last couple of years. The guy that really comes to mind for me, Larry Nance. That's the type of like utility bench big who like can cosplay as a starter, that I think Philly, if they can get that out of him, then Sixers fans, Sixers execs and coaches, they're going to be talking about this signing like they were talking about Kelly Oubre's minimum a year ago. And it's just a matter of seeing how it's all going to unfold.
Well, that's the connective playmaking part, right? That's like the A skill that Larry Nance brings, that and being a switchable defender at the 5 to give you a different look there. If Yabusele can do that, that would be absolutely massive in Philly's multi-year, multi-generational at this point, the ongoing saga of trying to figure out what you do in the minutes where Joel Embiid's not on the floor. Having Andre Drummond as a like for like size option, and then Yabusele as a sort of a change up, that's pretty interesting. It's important to me to note that you said fever dream there. What I said was you were sort of like a fever dream Josh McRoberts.
Yes,
and
we landed it.
Which the reason that I mentioned that was because that was also the comp I used for Paolo Banchero when I did this with Haberstroh about Blake. Who was this guy? Who could this guy be? And so basically, I guess what I'm saying is you're sort of the rec league Paolo Banchero in a lot of ways. The other thing I called you was fun size Kelly Olynyk. So I think I went back and did the research on it. I think some good comps there. I don't know if any of them are as good as Banye Wallace or Dump Truck Robinson, but we did the best we could.